Margaret Williams stood outside the children's home, holding the hand of a small 12-year-old girl. The girl had dark skin and big brown eyes that looked scared and hopeful at the same time. Her name was Zara, and today she was going to her new home. Margaret had been visiting the children's home for 3 years. She came every week to read stories and help with homework. She had watched Zara grow from a shy 9-year-old into a smart young girl who loved books and asked many questions. When Zara's foster family moved away and could not take her, Margaret knew what she had to do. "Are you ready to see your new home?" Margaret asked softly. Zara nodded but did not speak. She had learned not to get too excited about new homes. She had been in 5 different foster homes since she was 6 years old. Each time something went wrong. Sometimes the families decided they did not want her anymore. Sometimes they moved away. Sometimes there was not enough money to keep her. Margaret's car was big and expensive. It was black and shiny, and Zara had never been in such a nice car before. As they drove through the city, the buildings got bigger and prettier. The houses became huge with large yards and tall gates. "My husband Richard is very busy with work," Margaret said as they drove. "He might seem a little cold at first, but he will warm up to you. He just needs time." Zara looked out the window and said nothing. She had heard these words before from other families. Adults always said their husbands or boyfriends would warm up to her. They never did. The Williams house was the biggest house Zara had ever seen. It looked like a castle from the fairy tale books she loved to read. There were tall white columns in front and many windows that sparkled in the afternoon sun. The yard was huge with perfect green grass and beautiful flowers everywhere. "This is your home now," Margaret said as they walked up the long driveway. Richard Williams was waiting at the front door. He was a tall man with gray hair and expensive clothes. His face looked serious and not very friendly. He did not smile when he saw Zara. "So this is her," Richard said, looking at Zara like she was something he did not want to see. "Richard, please," Margaret said quietly. "This is Zara. This is my husband, Richard." Zara looked up at the tall man and tried to smile. "Hello, Mr. Williams," she said in a small voice. Richard did not say hello back. He just looked at her with cold eyes and then turned to his wife. "Margaret, we need to talk. Now." "Why don't you go inside and look around?" Margaret told Zara. "I will be right there." Zara walked into the house while Margaret and Richard talked outside. She could hear their voices getting louder, but she tried not to listen. The inside of the house was even more beautiful than the outside. Everything was white and gold and very clean. There were paintings on the walls and fresh flowers in tall vases. A woman in a uniform came over to Zara. "Hello, dear. I am Maria, the housekeeper. Mrs. Williams told me you were coming today. Would you like me to show you to your room?" Zara nodded and followed Maria up a wide staircase. The stairs had a red carpet and golden railings. At the top, there was a long hallway with many doors. "This is your room," Maria said, opening a door at the end of the hall. The room was bigger than any place Zara had ever lived. It had a big bed with pink and white covers, a desk by the window, and a closet that was bigger than some of the bedrooms she had stayed in before. There were already some toys and books on the shelves. "Mrs. Williams bought these for you," Maria said, pointing to the toys and books. "She wanted you to feel welcome." Zara sat on the bed and looked around. It was beautiful, but it did not feel like home. Nothing ever felt like home anymore. Margaret and Richard were still talking outside. Zara could see them from her window. Richard was moving his hands a lot and looked angry. Margaret looked sad and tired. When they finally came inside, it was time for dinner. The dining room was huge with a long table and fancy chairs. Zara sat between Margaret and Richard, but Richard did not talk to her. He talked to Margaret about business and money and people Zara did not know. "How was your day at school, Zara?" Margaret asked, trying to include her in the conversation. "I did not go to school today," Zara said quietly. "I was packing my things at the children's home." "Well, tomorrow we will register you for a new school," Margaret said with a smile. Richard made a sound like he was not happy about this. "Margaret, we discussed this. The private schools around here are very expensive. Maybe she should go to the public school. Richard, we can afford the private school, Margaret said firmly. That is not the point, Richard said, his voice getting colder. The point is whether it is worth spending that much money on ... He looked at Zara and did not finish his sentence. Zara felt her face get hot. She knew what he was going to say. She had heard it before from other people. They thought she was not worth spending money on because she was not their real daughter. Because she was different. Because she was black. After dinner, Margaret took Zara upstairs to help her unpack her few belongings. Zara did not have much. Just some clothes, a few books, and a small stuffed elephant that had been with her since. She was little. I know this is hard, Margaret said as they put Zara's clothes in the big closet. Moving to a new home is always scary. But I want you to know that you are safe here. You are wanted here. You are my daughter now. Zara looked at Margaret's kind face and wanted to believe her. But she had learned to protect her heart. Adults said many things they did not mean. What if Mr. Williams does not want me here? Zara asked quietly. Margaret sat down on the bed next to Zara. Richard just needs time to adjust. He has never been around children much. He will learn to love you, just like I do. But Zara was not so sure. She had seen the way Richard looked at her. It was the same way some people looked at her in stores or on the street, like she did not belong, like she was a problem to be solved. That night, Zara lay in her big new bed and listened to the sounds of the house. Everything was quiet and clean and perfect, but it did not feel like home. She missed the noise and chaos of the children's home. She missed the other kids who understood what it was like to be unwanted. She could hear Margaret and Richard talking in their room down the hall. Their voices were low, but sometimes Richard's voice got louder. She heard him say words like mistake and burden and what will people think. Zara pulled her stuffed elephant clothes and closed her eyes. She had survived 4 other homes that did not work out. She could survive this one too. She just had to be very quiet and very good and try not to cause any problems. Maybe if she was perfect, Richard would learn to like her. Maybe if she was smart and helpful and never complained, he would want her to stay. Maybe this time would be different, but deep in her heart, Zara was already preparing for the day when Margaret would have to take her back to the children's home. It always happened eventually. It was just a matter of time. 3 weeks had passed since Zara moved into the Williams house, and things were not getting better. If anything, Richard seemed to dislike her more each day. He never spoke to her directly unless he had to, and when he did, his voice was cold and unfriendly. Margaret had enrolled Zara in Westfield Academy, the most expensive private school in the city. The school uniform cost more money than some families spent on food for a month. Richard complained about every expense. Do you know how much that uniform cost? He said to Margaret one morning at breakfast. Zara was sitting right there, but he talked about her like she was not in the room. And the books, and the supplies, and the registration fee. This is getting out of hand, Margaret. Richard, we talked about this, Margaret said quietly. Zara needs a good education. There are perfectly good public schools, Richard said, cutting his food with sharp movements. Schools that do not cost us thousands of dollars every year. Zara kept eating her cereal and tried to make herself invisible. She had learned that the less attention she drew to herself, the better. But she could feel Richard's angry eyes on her sometimes, like he was trying to figure out why she was there. At school, Zara was doing very well. She was smart and loved to learn. Her teachers were impressed with how quickly she caught up with the other students. She was particularly good at math and English, but she did not tell anyone at home about her good grades. She was afraid Richard would find something wrong with them. The other students at Westfield Academy were all rich kids whose parents owned big companies or were famous doctors and lawyers. They had expensive clothes and phones and talked about their vacation homes and trips to other countries. Zara felt very different from them, but she was used to feeling different. One day, Zara came home from school excited because she had gotten the highest score on a math test. She wanted to tell Margaret, but when she walked into the kitchen, she heard Richard talking on his phone in the next room. I do not know what Margaret was thinking. Richard said to whoever he was talking to. She brought home this kid from some children's home? Yes, she is black. No, we do not know anything about her real parents. They could be criminals or drug addicts for all we know. Zara stopped walking and felt her heart start beating fast. She knew she should not listen, but she could not help it. The kid is in this expensive private school now, costing me a fortune, Richard continued. And for what? She will probably end up just like her birth parents anyway. You cannot change what someone is born to be. Margaret thinks she is saving the world, one orphan at a time, Richard laughed, but it was not a nice laugh. She does not understand that some people cannot be helped. Some people are just meant to be problems. Zara felt tears start to come to her eyes. She quietly put her backpack down and went upstairs to her room. She did not tell Margaret about her math test. Instead, she sat on her bed and wondered if Richard was right. Maybe she was just meant to be a problem. That evening at dinner, Richard was in a particularly bad mood. He had lost a big business deal and he was angry about it. Margaret tried to make conversation, but Richard just complained about everything. And another thing, Richard said, pointing his fork at Margaret. I saw the credit card bill today. Do you know how much money you spent on clothes for her last week? He was talking about Zara again like she was not there. Zara had needed some new clothes because she was growing and Margaret had taken her shopping. They had fun together, and Margaret had bought her some pretty dresses and comfortable shoes. She needed clothes, Richard, Margaret said. She is growing. She has clothes, Richard said. She does not need designer clothes. She is not our real daughter, Margaret. She is a charity case that you brought home. We do not need to spoil her. Zara felt her face get hot with shame. She looked down at her plate and tried not to cry. Margaret reached over and put her hand on Zara's arm. She is our daughter now, Margaret said firmly, and I will buy her whatever she needs. No. She is not, Richard said, his voice getting louder. She is your project, your way of feeling good about yourself. But she is not family, and she never will be. Margaret's face turned red, and Zara could see that she was very angry. Richard, that is enough. You are being cruel. I am being realistic. Richard said, You want to play house with this kid? Fine. But do not expect me to pretend she belongs here. Look around, Margaret. Look at this house. Look at our life. Does she really fit in here? Zara stood up from the table very quietly. May I be excused? She asked in a small voice. Margaret looked at her with sad eyes. Of course, sweetheart. Are you okay? Zara nodded, but she was not okay. She went upstairs to her room and closed the door. She could hear Margaret and Richard fighting downstairs, their voices getting louder and angrier. Later that night, Margaret came to Zara's room to say goodnight. Zara was reading one of her books and pretending everything was fine. Zara, I want you to know that what Richard said was wrong, Margaret said, sitting on the edge of the bed. You do belong here. You are my daughter, and I love you very much. It is okay, Zara said, but her voice was very quiet. I understand. No, it is not okay, Margaret said. Richard is having a hard time adjusting, but that does not give him the right to be mean to you. I am going to talk to him. But Zara had heard adults say they would talk to their husbands before. It never changed anything. The men always stayed the same, and eventually the women got tired of fighting about it. The next few days were very tense in the house. Margaret and Richard barely spoke to each other. Richard continued to ignore Zara or make little comments about how much money she was costing them. When Margaret was not around, Richard was even worse. One morning, Margaret had to leave early for a doctor's appointment. Zara came downstairs for breakfast, and only Richard was there, reading his newspaper and drinking coffee. Make your own breakfast, Richard said without looking up from his paper. Maria does not need to wait on you hand and foot. Zara quietly made herself some toast and sat at the table. She tried to be very quiet, but Richard seemed annoyed just by her presence. You know, Richard said, folding his newspaper and looking at her with cold eyes, Margaret might think she is helping you, but she is not. She is setting you up for failure. Zara stopped eating and looked at him. You think this life is normal? Richard continued. You think this is how everyone lives? But it is not. This is not your world, and it never will be. When you grow up and have to live in the real world, you are going to be very disappointed. I know this is not my real world, Zara said quietly. I know I do not belong here. Richard seemed surprised that she spoke. Good, at least you are smart enough to understand that. Margaret thinks she can change your future by putting you in fancy schools and buying you expensive clothes. But you cannot change what you are. What am I? Zara asked, even though she was afraid of the answer. You are a poor black girl from the foster system, Richard said coldly. That is what you were born as, and that is what you will always be. All of this, he waved his hand around the beautiful kitchen, is just pretend. Zara felt like someone had punched her in the stomach. She got up from the table and threw away her half-eaten toast. I have to get ready for school, she said, as she walked upstairs. She heard Richard call after her. Remember what I said? Do not get too comfortable here. This is not permanent. That day at school, Zara could not concentrate on her lessons. She kept thinking about what Richard had said. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was just pretending to be something she was not. Maybe she did not deserve this nice life. When she got home, Margaret was waiting for her with a smile. How was school? Today, sweetheart, it was fine, Zara lied. She did not want to tell Margaret what Richard had said. She did not want to cause more fighting between them, but that night, lying in her big bed in her beautiful room, Zara made a decision. She would try to be perfect. She would get the best grades, 'cause no trouble, and maybe, just maybe, she could prove to Richard that she deserved to stay. She would show him that she was worth the money Margaret spent on her. She did not know yet that Richard had already made up his mind about her, and no amount of being perfect would ever be enough to change it. 2 months had passed since Zara moved into the Williams house. She had kept her promise to herself to be perfect. Her grades were excellent. She never complained about anything, and she stayed out of Richard's way as much as possible. But Richard still treated her like she was a burden. One evening, while Margaret and Richard were at a business dinner, Zara decided to explore parts of the huge house she had not seen yet. The house was so big that there were rooms she had never been inside. Maria, the housekeeper, had told her she could go anywhere she wanted, but Zara was usually too nervous to wander around. She walked down a long hallway on the first floor and found a door that was slightly open. When she pushed it open, she gasped. Inside was the most beautiful room she had ever seen. It was a music room with tall windows and soft lighting. But what made her heart skip was the grand piano in the center of the room. The piano was huge and black and shiny. It looked like something from a fairy tale. Zara had never seen a real piano up close before. She walked over to it slowly, almost afraid to touch it. She lifted the lid that covered the keys and saw the beautiful black and white pattern. Very gently, she pressed one key. The sound that came out was clear and beautiful, much different from the old keyboard at the children's home that only half the keys worked on. Zara sat down on the bench and touched a few more keys. She did not know how to play piano, but she had always loved music. At the children's home, she would listen to music on an old radio and imagine what it would be like to make those beautiful sounds herself. She pressed a few keys together and liked the way they sounded. Then she tried to remember a simple song she had heard on the radio. It took her a while, but she figured out how to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star with one finger. From that night on, whenever Margaret and Richard were not home, Zara would sneak into the music room and play the piano. She taught herself simple songs by listening to music on her phone and then trying to find the right keys. It was hard at first, but she was determined to learn. Maria found her there one afternoon when she was supposed to be doing homework. "I'm sorry," Zara said quickly, jumping up from the piano bench. "I know I should not be in here." "Who said you should not be in here?" Maria asked with a kind smile. "Mrs. Williams told you that you could go anywhere in the house." "But the piano ... Zara said nervously. "The piano has not been played in years," Maria said sadly. "Mr. Richard's first wife used to play. She was very good. But after she died, Mr. Richard closed this room. Mrs. Williams opened it again when you came, hoping someone would use it. Zara was surprised. She did not know that Richard had been married before Margaret. You sound very good for someone who does not know how to play, Maria said. I'm just making it up, Zara said. I do not really know what I am doing. Would you play something for me? Maria asked. Zara felt nervous, but she sat back down and played the song she had been working on. It was Amazing Grace, and she had figured out how to play it with both hands. Maria listened with a big smile on her face. That was beautiful, Maria said when Zara finished. You have a gift, child. Have you ever taken piano lessons? Zara shook her head. We could not afford lessons at the children's home. Well, you should ask Mrs. Williams about lessons. I think she would be very happy to get you a teacher. But Zara was not sure about that. Richard already complained about how much money Margaret spent on her. Piano lessons would probably make him even angrier. That weekend, Margaret found Zara in the music room. Zara was so focused on playing that she did not hear Margaret come in. She was working on a more difficult song she had found on the internet. Zara? Margaret said softly. Zara jumped and turned around, her face red with embarrassment. I am sorry, Mrs. Williams. I was just ... Do not apologize, Margaret said, her eyes wide with surprise. That was beautiful. Where did you learn to play like that? I taught myself, Zara said quietly. I found some videos on the internet and practiced when you were not home. I hope that is okay. Margaret sat down next to Zara on the piano bench. It is more than okay. It is wonderful. How long have you been playing? About a month, Zara said. I know I am not very good. Zara, you are amazing, Margaret said with tears in her eyes. Most people cannot play like that after years of lessons. You have real talent. Margaret asked Zara to play the song again. Zara played Amazing Grace, and Margaret watched her fingers move across the keys with growing amazement. Zara played with feeling, not just hitting the right notes but making the music sound emotional and beautiful. We need to get you a piano teacher, Margaret said when Zara finished. But Mr. Richard will be angry about the money, Zara said quietly. Margaret's face got serious. Let me worry about Richard. Music lessons are important, and you clearly have a special gift. We are going to find you the best teacher in the city. The next week, Margaret started looking for piano teachers. She wanted someone really good, someone who could help Zara develop her natural talent. She asked friends and called music schools until she found the perfect person, Elena. Petrov was a famous piano teacher who had taught many successful musicians. She usually only taught advanced students, but when Margaret called and told her about Zara, Elena agreed to meet with them. Elena was a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes. When she came to the house, Margaret brought her to the music room where Zara was waiting nervously. So, you are the young lady who taught herself to play piano, Elena said with a slight accent. She was from Russia and had been teaching piano for 40 years. Yes, ma'am, Zara said politely. Show me what you can do, Elena said, sitting in a chair next to the piano. Zara was very nervous, but she played Amazing Grace the way she had learned it. Elena listened carefully, watching Zara's hands and face. When Zara finished, Elena was quiet for a long moment. How old are you? Elena asked. 12, Zara said. And you learned this in 1 month? Yes, ma'am. Elena looked at Margaret with wide eyes. This child is extraordinary. Her technique needs work, of course, but her musical understanding is remarkable. She plays with real feeling. Margaret smiled. So you will teach her? I would. Be honored to teach her, Elena said. But I must warn you, if she is as talented as I think she is, she will need to practice many hours every day. Music at this level requires complete dedication. I want to learn, Zara said quickly. I will practice as much as you want me to, Elena smiled. Good, we will start with basic technique and music theory. But I can already tell that you will advance very quickly. Margaret arranged for Elena to come twice a week for lessons. She paid Elena in cash and asked her not to send any bills to the house. She did not want Richard to know about the lessons until she figured out how to tell him. Zara was so excited about her piano lessons that she could hardly sleep. She practiced every day after school, sometimes for 2 or 3 hours. The music room became her favorite place in the whole house. When she was playing piano, she forgot about all her worries and problems. Elena was amazed by how quickly Zara learned. In just a few weeks, Zara was playing pieces that usually took students months to master. Elena started giving her more difficult music, including pieces by famous composers like Mozart and Chopin. "You have the gift," Elena told Zara one day, after a particularly good lesson. "Not everyone who plays piano has this gift. You feel the music in your heart, and your hands know how to express what your heart feels." Zara did not fully understand what Elena meant, but she knew that playing piano made her feel happy and peaceful in a way she had never felt before. When she played, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Margaret often listened from outside the music room door. She was amazed by the beautiful sounds coming from the piano. Sometimes the music was so lovely that it made her cry. She knew that Zara had found something special, something that belonged only to her, but Richard still did not know about the piano lessons. He was often not home when Elena came for lessons, and when he was home, he stayed in his office. The music room was far enough away that he could not hear the piano from most parts of the house. One evening, Richard came home early from work while Zara was practicing. She was playing a piece by Chopin that Elena had taught her. It was sad and beautiful, and Zara put all of her feelings into the music. Richard heard the piano music as soon as he walked into the house. He stopped and listened for a moment, confused. He had not heard piano music in the house for many years. Not since his first wife died. He followed the sound to the music room and saw Zara at the piano. She was completely focused on the music, her eyes closed, her fingers moving across the keys like she had been playing for years. Richard watched from the doorway, surprised. He had no idea that Zara could play piano. As he listened, he found himself remembering his first wife who had loved to play piano. The memory made him feel sad and angry at the same time. When Zara finished the piece, she opened her eyes and saw Richard standing in the doorway. Her face went white with fear. "I am sorry," she said quickly, starting to get up from the piano. "Bench, where did you learn to play like that?" Richard asked, his voice cold. "I taught myself," Zara said, her voice barely a whisper. "No one teaches themselves to play Chopin," Richard said. Margaret appeared behind Richard. The fight between Margaret and Richard about the piano lessons lasted for 3 days. Zara could hear them arguing behind closed doors, their voices getting louder each day. She was so worried that she could barely eat or concentrate on her schoolwork. She kept thinking that any moment Margaret would tell her the lessons had to stop, but Margaret won the fight. She told Richard that Zara would continue with her piano lessons, and if he did not like it, she would take Zara and leave. Richard was so angry that he did not speak to either of them for a week. When Elena came for the next lesson, she could tell that something was wrong. Zara was nervous and kept looking toward the door, afraid that Richard might come in and stop the lesson. "What is troubling you, little one?" Elena asked in her gentle voice. "Mr. Richard does not want me to take piano lessons," Zara said quietly. "He thinks it is a waste of money." Elena sat down next to Zara on the piano bench. "Let me tell you something. I have taught piano for 40 years. I have taught children whose parents spent thousands of dollars on lessons but who had no real talent. And I have taught children like you who have a gift that is worth more than all the money in the world." "But what if he makes me stop?" Zara asked. "And then we'll find another way," Elena said firmly. "Talent like yours should not be wasted because one person does not understand its value. Now let us make beautiful music together." Richard's attitude toward Zara became even worse after the piano incident. He seemed to look for ways to make her feel unwelcome in the house. When his business friends came over for meetings, he would make cruel comments about Zara in front of them. One evening, Richard was having an important dinner meeting with 3 other businessmen. Margaret had prepared a beautiful dinner, and they were all sitting in the dining room talking about money and investments. Zara was upstairs doing homework, but she came down to get a glass of water from the kitchen. As she walked past the dining room, she heard Richard's voice getting louder. He had been drinking wine, and his words were slurred. My wife has this idea that she can save the world, Richard was saying to his friends. She brought home this kid from a children's home, a charity case. Zara stopped walking and pressed herself against the wall outside the dining room. She knew she should not listen, but she could not help herself. The kid is costing me a fortune, Richard continued. Private school, clothes, piano lessons, and for what? She will probably end up just like her real parents anyway. One of the businessmen asked, "What happened to her real parents?" "Who knows?" Richard said with a mean laugh. "Probably drugs, probably crime. These people do not change just because you put them in a nice house and send them to fancy schools. Bad blood is bad blood." "Richard, that seems a bit harsh," another man said uncomfortably. "Harsh but true," Richard said. "My wife thinks she can turn this girl into something she is not. But you cannot make a racehorse out of a mule, if you know what I mean." The men at the table were quiet for a moment. Even they seemed uncomfortable with what Richard was saying. "The worst part," Richard continued, "is that my wife actually thinks this kid has talent. She is paying some expensive piano teacher too. Give her lessons. As if playing piano will somehow change what she is." Zara felt tears start to roll down her face. She quietly went back upstairs without getting her water. She sat on her bed and cried, thinking about Richard's words. Was he right? Was she just wasting everyone's time and money? The next day at school, Zara could not focus on anything. Her teacher asked her if she was feeling sick because she looked so sad. But Zara just said she was tired when she got home. Margaret was waiting for her with a smile. "Elena called today. She said you are ready to start working on more advanced pieces. She thinks you might be ready for a real challenge." "Maybe we should stop the lessons," Zara said quietly. Margaret looked surprised. "Why would we stop the lessons? You love playing piano." "Mr. Richard is right. It is too expensive. And maybe I am not as good as Elena thinks I am." Margaret sat down next to Zara and took her hands. "Zara, what brought this on?" "Yesterday you were so excited about learning a new piece." Zara did not want to tell Margaret that she had overheard Richard talking to his friends. She did not want to cause more fighting between them. "I just think maybe Mr. Richard is right about me," Zara said. "Right about what?" "That I do not belong here. That I am just a charity case. That you cannot change what someone is born to be." Margaret's face got very red, and Zara could see that she was angry. "Did Richard say those things to you?" "Not exactly to me," Zara said quietly. "But you heard him say them to someone else?" Zara nodded, and fresh tears started to fall. Margaret stood up, and her hands were shaking with anger. "Zara, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Nothing that Richard said is true. You are not a charity case. You are my daughter, and you are talented and smart and wonderful. Do not let his cruel words make you doubt yourself. That the damage was already done." Richard's words had planted seeds of doubt in Zara's mind. Even though she continued with her piano lessons and continued to improve, part of her wondered if she was fooling herself. Maybe she was not as good as Elena said. Maybe she was just wasting everyone's time and money. Richard's behavior got even worse over the next few weeks. He seemed to enjoy making Zara feel small and unwanted. When Margaret was not around, he would make little comments that cut like knives. "Still pretending to be a pianist?" he would say when he saw her going to the music room. "How much money did you waste on clothes today?" he would ask when she came home from shopping with Margaret. "I hope you realize this is all temporary," he said one morning when they were alone at breakfast. "This fancy life, this house, these expensive lessons, it is all just pretend. One day Margaret will get tired of playing mother, and you will be back where you started." Each comment hurt Zara deeply, but she tried not to show it. She had learned that showing pain only made Richard enjoy it more. So she would just nod and walk away, then go to her room and cry. The worst incident happened on a Saturday evening, when Richard was having a party for his business associates and their wives. It was a big party with expensive food and live music. Margaret had bought Zara a beautiful dress for the occasion and told her she could stay for the party instead of going to her room like she usually did when they had guests. Zara felt pretty in her new dress and was excited to be included. She stayed close to Margaret and tried to be polite to all the guests. Everything was going well until Richard started drinking too much wine. As the evening went on, Richard got louder and more careless with his words. He was telling stories to a group of men about his business deals and his success. Then one of the men asked about Zara. "Is that your daughter over there?" "She is lovely." Richard looked over at Zara, who was standing with Margaret and talking to some of the wives. His eyes were cold and mean. "Oh, that is not my daughter," Richard said loudly. "That is my wife's little project. We adopted her from a children's home. Margaret thinks she can turn her into a proper young lady." The group of men looked uncomfortable, but Richard continued. "The funny thing is, Margaret actually thinks the kid has musical talent. She is spending a fortune on piano lessons, as if learning to play piano will somehow change her background." "Maybe she does have talent," one of the men said carefully. Richard laughed loudly. "Please, you can dress them up and teach them manners, but you cannot change their basic nature. She might learn to hit the right keys, but she will never be a real musician. Real talent comes from breeding, from family background. This kid. He waved his hand dismissively. "This kid comes from nothing." Several people at the party had stopped talking and were now listening to Richard. Zara heard every word. She felt like everyone was staring at her, judging her, agreeing with Richard that she did not belong there. Margaret heard what Richard was saying and quickly walked over to him. "Richard, I think you have had enough to drink." "I am just being honest," Richard said loudly. "Everyone here knows what I'm talking about. You cannot make silk from cotton, Margaret. You cannot make a lady from a street kid." The room was very quiet now. Even the hired musicians had stopped playing. Everyone was looking at Richard and Margaret and Zara. Zara felt her face burning with shame and embarrassment. "Excuse me," Zara whispered to Margaret, and she ran upstairs to her room. She could hear Margaret telling the guests that the party was over and asking them to leave. She could hear Richard shouting that Margaret was overreacting. But all Zara could think about were Richard's words echoing in her head. "You cannot make silk from cotton. You cannot make a lady from a street kid." That night, after all the guests had gone home and the house was quiet, Zara made a decision. She would show Richard that he was wrong about her. She would practice piano harder than ever before. She would become so good that even he would have to admit that she had real talent. She did not know that her determination would lead her to discover just how much musical gift she really had. And she did not know that Richard's cruel words would eventually come back to haunt him in ways he never expected. But that night, lying in her bed, all Zara knew was that she wanted to prove him wrong. She wanted to show him and everyone else that she was worth something, that she could be somebody important. The piano would be her weapon against his. The morning after Richard's cruel display at the party, Margaret woke up with a heavy heart and a firm decision. She had spent the entire night thinking about what Richard had said and how he had humiliated Zara in front of all their guests. She could not let this continue. Margaret found Richard in his office, reading emails and acting like nothing had happened the night before. She closed the door behind her and sat down across from his desk. "We need to talk," Margaret said, her voice steady but serious. Richard looked up from his computer with an annoyed expression. "If this is about last night, I do not want to hear it. I had a few drinks and spoke honestly." "There is nothing wrong with that." "There is everything wrong with that," Margaret said, her voice getting stronger. "What you said about Zara was cruel and completely unacceptable. She is a 12-year-old child, Richard. A child who has already been through more pain than most adults. She is not our child," Richard said coldly. "I never agreed to this adoption, Margaret. You forced this on me, and now you want me to pretend I am happy about it." "I am not asking you to pretend anything," Margaret said. "I am asking you to treat her with basic human kindness." "But apparently that is too much to ask." Richard stood up from his desk and walked to the window. "You do not understand what you have done, Margaret. This girl comes from a bad background. We do not know what kind of problems she might have, or what kind of trouble she might cause. The only problem she has is living with a man who treats her like she is worthless, Margaret said, standing up too. Zara is a beautiful, intelligent, talented child. She has never caused one moment of trouble in this house. Talented? Richard laughed meanly. You mean those piano lessons? Margaret, just because she can play a few songs does not mean she has real talent. You are setting her up for disappointment. Elena Petrov thinks differently, Margaret said, firmly. Elena has taught some of the most successful pianists in the world, and she says Zara has extraordinary natural ability. Elena Petrov is taking your money and telling you what you want to hear, Richard said. Margaret felt her anger rising. You know what, Richard? I am done trying to convince you to love Zara, but I will not allow you to destroy her confidence and self-worth with your cruelty. If you cannot be kind to her, then you need to stay away from her completely. This is my house, Richard said, turning around to face her. And she is my daughter, Margaret said firmly. If you force me to choose, between you and her, I will choose her every time. Do you understand me? Richard stared at his wife in surprise. Margaret had never spoken to him like this before. She had always been gentle and agreeable, trying to keep peace in the house. But now her eyes were fierce and determined. You would leave me for that kid? Richard asked. I would leave you to protect that kid, Margaret said. Zara did not choose to come here, Richard. I brought her here and promised her a safe, loving home. I will not break that promise because you cannot get past your own prejudices. Richard was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he sat back down. At his desk, Fine, I will stay out of her way. But do not expect me to play happy family. I expect you to be civil, Margaret said. That is all. Margaret left Richard's office and went to find Zara. She found her in the music room, practicing piano. But instead of the beautiful, confident playing that Margaret usually heard, Zara's music sounded sad and uncertain. Good morning, sweetheart, Margaret said softly. Zara stopped playing and turned around. Her eyes were red from crying. Good morning, Mrs. Williams. How are you feeling today? I am okay, Zara said quietly. But Margaret could see that she was not okay at all. Margaret sat down on the piano bench next to Zara. I want to apologize for what happened last night. What Richard said was wrong and hurtful, and I am sorry. You had to hear it. Maybe he is right, though, Zara said in a small voice. Maybe I am just pretending to be something I am not. Zara, look at me, Margaret said, taking her hands. Richard is not right. He is angry and bitter, and he is taking his feelings out on you, but that does not make what he says true. But what if I am not really good at piano? Zara asked. What? If Elena is just being nice to me because you pay her? Margaret's heart broke hearing the doubt in Zara's voice. Sweetheart, Elena Petrov does not need our money. She is one of the most respected piano teachers in the world. She could teach anyone she wants. Do you think she would waste her time on someone who does not have real talent? Zara thought about this for a moment. I guess not. And let me tell you something else, Margaret continued. Even if you never became a famous pianist, even if you only played piano for your own enjoyment, you would still be worthy of love and respect. Your value as a person has nothing to do with what you can do. You are valuable simply because you exist. Tears started to fall down Zara's cheeks. I just want to belong somewhere. I just want someone to be proud of me. Margaret pulled Zara into a tight hug. I am proud of you every single day. I am proud of how smart you are, how kind you are, how hard you work. I am proud to be your mother. They sat together for a while, holding each other. Then Margaret had an idea. You know what? I think it is time for Elena to hear what you have been working on lately. And I think it is time for some other people to hear you play too. What do you mean? Zara asked. Elena mentioned something about a piano competition for young people. Maybe it is time to see if you are ready for something like that? Zara's eyes got wide. A competition? But I have only been taking lessons for a few months. Let us see what? Elena thinks, Margaret said. If she thinks you are ready, then we will consider it. If not, there will be other competitions in the future. That afternoon, when Elena came for Zara's lesson, Margaret talked to her privately first. How do you really feel about Zara's progress? Margaret asked. And please be completely honest. With me, Elena's eyes lit up. Mrs. Williams, in 40 years of teaching, I have never had a student like Zara. Her natural musicality is extraordinary. Most students take years to develop the kind of emotional expression that Zara has naturally. Do you think she might be ready for some kind of performance or competition? Actually, Elena said with excitement, I have been thinking about exactly that. There is a national young pianist competition coming up in 3 months. It is for students under 18, and the winner gets a scholarship to study at any music conservatory in the country. Margaret felt excited but also nervous. Do you think Zara has a chance? I think Zara could win, Elena said seriously. But it would mean intensive practice for the next 3 months. She would need to learn a very difficult piece perfectly. It would be a lot of pressure for a 12-year-old. Let us ask her what she wants to do, Margaret said. When they told Zara about the competition, her face lit up with excitement and fear at the same time. You really think I could compete with other kids who have been playing for years? Zara asked Elena. I think you could compete with anyone, Elena said confidently. But it will be hard work. You will need to practice at least 4 hours every day, and you will need to perform in front of hundreds of people and a panel of judges. Zara thought about this for a moment. Then she remembered Richard's words from the night before. She remembered how he had said she could never be a real musician, that she was just pretending. I want to do it, Zara said firmly. I want to enter the competition, Elena smiled. Good, then we have a lot of work to do. I am going to teach you Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It is one of the most beautiful and challenging pieces ever written for piano. Is it very hard? Zara asked. It is extremely difficult, Elena said honestly. Professional pianists spend months learning this piece, but I believe you can do it. For the next 3 months, Zara's life revolved around piano practice. She woke up early to practice before school, practiced again as soon as she got home, and practiced for hours every evening. Elena came for lessons 3 times a week instead of twice. Margaret supported Zara completely. She made sure Zara had healthy meals and enough rest. She listened to Zara practice and offered encouragement. When the difficult passages seemed impossible to master, she even learned about the competition rules and requirements so she could help Zara prepare. Richard noticed that Zara was spending even more time at the piano, but he just rolled his eyes and made sarcastic comments about Margaret wasting even more money on this fantasy. But Margaret did not care what Richard thought. She could see how hard Zara was working and how much the music meant to her. She could also see that Zara was becoming more confident and self-assured as she mastered the difficult piece. You know, Margaret said to Zara one evening after a particularly good practice session, regardless of what happens at the competition, I want you to know that I am already proud of you. The way you have dedicated yourself to this music, the way you have worked so hard to improve, shows real character. Thank you for believing in me, Zara said. Even when I do not believe in myself. That is what mothers do, Margaret said with a smile. They believe in their children even when their children cannot believe in themselves. As the competition grew closer, Zara felt nervous but also excited. She had worked harder on this piece than she had ever worked on anything in her life. Elena said she was ready, and Margaret believed in her completely, the only person who did not believe. With only 6 weeks left until the National Young Pianist competition, Zara's practice schedule became even more intense. She was now spending nearly 5 hours a day at the piano, working on every small detail of Chopin's Ballade No. 1. Her fingers had developed calluses, and sometimes her back ached from sitting at the piano for so long, but she refused to give up. Elena was amazed by Zara's dedication and progress. In my 40 years of teaching, she told Margaret, I have never seen a student work this hard or improve this quickly. Zara is not just learning the notes, she is understanding the soul of the music. The piece Elena had chosen was not just difficult technically, it was also emotionally complex. Chopin had written it to tell a story of love, loss, and triumph. Elena spent hours teaching Zara not just how to play the notes correctly, but how to make each section of the music express Different emotions. This beginning part is gentle and hopeful, Elena explained, playing the opening measures. It is like someone falling in love for the first time. Your touch should be soft and dreamy here. Then Elena moved to a more dramatic section. But here, the music becomes stormy and passionate. This is where the love faces challenges and obstacles. Your playing should be strong and emotional, but still controlled. Zara listened carefully and tried to understand what Elena meant. At first, it was hard for her to connect her own emotions to the music. But as she practiced more, she began to understand that she could put her own feelings into the piece. All the sadness she felt about Richard's rejection, all the gratitude she felt toward Margaret's love, all the determination she felt to prove herself worthy. All of these emotions could be expressed through the piano. Margaret watched Zara's transformation with wonder. The shy, uncertain girl who had arrived at their house 6 months ago was becoming a confident young musician. When Zara played, her whole body seemed to come alive. Her face showed every emotion the music expressed, and her fingers moved across the keys like she was having a conversation with the piano. "She's becoming an artist," Margaret told Elena one day after a particularly moving practice session. "She always was an artist," Elena replied. "She just needed someone to believe in her and give her the tools to express what was already inside her." Richard remained completely unaware of how seriously Zara was preparing for the competition. Margaret had decided not to tell him about it until closer to the event. She knew he would only make discouraging comments that might shake Zara's confidence, but Richard's attitude toward Zara had changed slightly since Margaret's strong words to him. He was no longer openly cruel to her, but he still acted like she was invisible. He would walk past her without saying hello, and if she tried to make conversation, he would give short, cold answers. One evening, Zara was practicing a particularly difficult passage that required her to play very fast runs with both hands. She had been working on this same section for over an hour, and she was getting frustrated because she kept making small mistakes. Richard was in his office nearby, trying to work on some business papers. The sound of Zara playing the same passage over and over again was distracting him. Finally, he got up and walked to the music room. "Do you have to play the same thing 100 times?" he asked irritably. Zara stopped playing and looked at him nervously. "I'm sorry, I was trying to get this part right." "Well, you are not getting it right, and the noise is bothering me," Richard said. "I can stop practicing for tonight," Zara offered quietly. Richard looked at her for a moment, then at the piano, then back at her. "What is this piece you are working on anyway? It sounds like something I have heard before." "It is Chopin's Ballade No. 1, Zara said. Richard's expression changed slightly. "Chopin, that is serious classical music. Are you sure you are ready for something that advanced?" "Elena thinks I am ready," Zara said. "Elena is paid to think you are ready," Richard said dismissively. But then he paused and listened as Zara played a slow, beautiful section of the piece. Despite himself, he had to admit that it sounded quite good. "Why are you working so hard on this particular piece?" Richard asked. Zara hesitated. Margaret had told her not to mention the competition to Richard yet. "Elena just wants me to challenge myself with more difficult music." Richard shrugged. "Well, try to keep the volume down. Some of us have real work to do." After Richard left, Zara continued practicing, but she played more softly. She did not want to give him any reason to complain about her music. The next day, Elena noticed that Zara seemed nervous and was not playing with her usual confidence. "What is troubling you today?" Elena asked. "Mr. Richard complained about my practicing last night," Zara said. "He said the noise was bothering him," Elena frowned. "Zara, you cannot worry about what Richard thinks while you are preparing for this competition. Music requires complete focus and dedication. If you start holding back or worrying about disturbing him, it will hurt your performance." "But I do not want to cause problems between him and Mrs. Williams," Zara said. "Let Margaret worry about Richard," Elena said firmly. "Your job is to focus on your music. Now, let us work on that difficult passage from yesterday. And this time, play it with full volume and full emotion." Do not hold anything back. As the weeks passed, Zara's playing became more and more impressive. She had not only mastered the technical difficulties of the piece, but she was also playing it with real artistic expression. Elena started inviting other music teachers to listen to Zara practice, and they were all amazed by what they heard. This girl could have a real career as a professional pianist, one teacher told Elena. Her technique is excellent, but more importantly, she has that special quality that cannot be taught. She makes you feel the music in your heart. Margaret was so proud of Zara that she could hardly contain her excitement. She wanted to tell everyone she knew about Zara's talent and hard work. But she kept the secret, knowing that the surprise would be even better when Zara performed at the competition. 1 month before the competition, Elena made an important decision. I think you are ready to perform this piece in front of an audience, she told Zara. We need to arrange a practice performance so you can get used to playing for other people. Margaret arranged for a small gathering at their house. She invited some of her friends from her charity work, telling them only that she wanted them to hear something special. She also invited Maria the housekeeper and Elena's husband, who was also a musician. On the evening of the practice performance, about 15 people gathered in the Williams' living room. Margaret had moved some furniture around to create a small concert space with the piano as the focus. Zara was very nervous. She had never played for anyone except Elena and Margaret before. Her hands were shaking as she sat down at the piano. Remember, Elena whispered to her, just focus on the music. Let everything else disappear and tell the story with your heart. Zara took a deep breath and began to play. At first, she was very aware of all the people watching her, and her playing was a little stiff and nervous. But as she got deeper into the piece, she forgot about the audience and lost herself in the music. The room was completely silent except for the beautiful sounds coming from the piano. Zara played the gentle opening with such tenderness that several people had tears in their eyes. When she reached the stormy, passionate middle section, her playing became so powerful and emotional that everyone in the room held their breath. By the time Zara finished the piece, there was not a dry eye in the room. The audience sat in stunned silence for a moment, then broke into enthusiastic applause. That was extraordinary, said one of Margaret's friends. How long has she been playing? About 8 months, Margaret said proudly. 8 months? Another guest said in disbelief. That is impossible. She plays like someone who has been studying for years. Elena stood up and addressed the small audience. What you just heard is what we call natural musical genius. It is very rare and very precious. This young lady has a gift that could take her anywhere she wants to go in the world of music. Richard had been working late in his office and missed the entire performance. When he came home and saw the guests leaving, he asked Margaret what the gathering was about. Just some friends getting together, Margaret said vaguely. I heard piano music earlier. Was someone performing? Zara played a little bit for our guests, Margaret said. I hope she did not embarrass you, Richard said. Playing for your charity friends is one thing, but she should not get ideas above her station. Margaret just smiled and said nothing. She knew that in just 1 month, Richard would find out exactly what Zara was capable of. And she could hardly wait to see the look on his face when he realized how wrong he had been about her. That night, Zara lay in bed feeling excited and nervous about the competition. The practice performance had gone well, and Elena said she was ready, but she knew that the real competition would be much more challenging. With experienced young pianists from all over the country, she thought about all the hours she had practiced, all the time she had played the same difficult passages, over and over until they were perfect. She thought about Margaret's encouragement and Elena's teaching and her own determination to prove that she was worth something. In just 1 month, she would find out if all her hard work would pay off. In just 1 month, she would have the chance. The morning of the National Young Pianist Competition dawned bright and clear. Zara woke up early, her stomach filled with butterflies. Today was the day she had been preparing for during the past 3 months. Today she would find out if all Her hard work and dreams were worth something. Margaret had spent weeks planning how to get Richard to attend the competition without revealing the real reason. She finally decided to tell him it was a charity gala for the city's music program, an event where important business people would be gathering. She knew Richard never missed an opportunity to network with wealthy potential clients. "There is an important event tonight at the Symphony Hall," Margaret told Richard over breakfast. "Several major business leaders will be there, including some people you have been wanting to meet." "What kind of event?" Richard asked, looking up from his newspaper. "A fundraiser for the city's youth music program," Margaret said carefully. "It is a very exclusive event," Black Tie required. Richard considered this. Symphony Hall was the most prestigious venue in the city, and if important business people were going to be there, it would be good for his company's image to be seen at such an event. "Fine," Richard said. "I suppose we should make an appearance." "Good," Margaret said, trying to hide her excitement. "The event starts at 7 o'clock. What Richard did not know was that Margaret had bought 3 front-row seats to the competition. She had also arranged for Elena and her husband to sit with them. Everything was planned perfectly. Zara spent the morning trying to stay calm. Elena came over early to help her prepare mentally for the performance. "Remember," Elena said as they sat in the music room, "you know this piece better than you know anything else in the world. You have practiced it thousands of times. Trust your preparation and trust your heart." "What if I make a mistake?" Zara asked nervously. "Everyone makes small mistakes," Elena said. "The judges are not looking for perfection. They are looking for musical artistry, for someone who can make them feel something through their playing. And that is exactly what you do." Zara played through the entire piece one last time. Her fingers moved confidently across the keys and the music flowed beautifully. She was ready. In the afternoon, Margaret helped Zara get ready for the competition. She had bought Zara a beautiful black dress that was elegant but comfortable enough to play piano in. They styled Zara's hair in a simple but sophisticated way, and Margaret gave her a small silver necklace that had been her grandmother's. "You look beautiful," Margaret said, tears forming in her eyes. "But more importantly, you look confident and ready." "I am scared," Zara admitted. "It is okay to be scared," Margaret said. "Being scared means this is important to you. Just remember that no matter what happens tonight, I am proud of you. You have already accomplished something amazing just by getting this far." At 5 o'clock they arrived at Symphony Hall. The building was massive and beautiful, with tall columns and elegant architecture. Zara had never been inside such a grand place before. The competition was being held in the main concert hall, which had over 1,000 seats. When Zara walked into the hall and saw how big it was, she felt overwhelmed. "So many people," she whispered to Elena. "Do not think about the people," Elena advised. "When you sit down at that piano, imagine you are back in the music room at home. It is just you and the music having a conversation together." There were 12 young pianists competing that night, ranging in age from 10 to 17. Zara was one of the youngest competitors. As she looked around at the other participants, she could see that many of them looked very confident and experienced. Some of them had expensive performance clothes and their own piano technicians checking the instruments for them. "Those kids have probably been competing for years," Zara said nervously to Margaret. "And you have something they do not have," Margaret replied. "You have natural talent and genuine emotion in your playing. Technical skill can be learned, but what you have cannot be taught." Richard arrived at Symphony Hall at exactly 7 o'clock, wearing his best tuxedo and expecting to schmooze with business associates. He was confused when Margaret led him to seats in the front row of the concert hall instead of to a cocktail reception. "Where is the networking part of this event?" Richard asked Margaret. "It will be after the performances," Margaret said vaguely. "Performances?" Richard looked around and noticed the piano on stage and the program in his hand. "Margaret, what exactly is this event?" Before Margaret could answer, the lights dimmed and the competition began. A distinguished-looking man walked onto the stage and began speaking into a microphone. "Welcome to the National Young Pianist Competition," the announcer said. Tonight, 12 of the most talented young pianists in the country will compete for the grand prize scholarship to study at any music conservatory of their choice. Richard turned to stare at Margaret with growing suspicion and anger. "Margaret, what is going on here?" Margaret said. "I will explain later." The first competitor, a 15-year-old boy from New York, walked onto the stage and began playing a piece by Mozart. He was technically very good, but his playing felt cold and mechanical to Zara. The audience clapped politely when he finished. One by one, the young pianists performed. Some were excellent, with years of training and competition experience. Others were good, but not exceptional. Richard sat through the first few performances, getting more and more irritated, checking his watch and wondering when he could leave. Finally, the announcer called out, "Our next performer is 12-year-old Zara Williams, performing Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor." Richard's head snapped up when he heard the name. He watched in shock as Zara walked onto the huge stage, looking tiny but determined in her black dress. "What is she doing up there?" Richard hissed to Margaret. "She is competing," Margaret said calmly. "Competing? This is ridiculous, Margaret. She has only been taking lessons for a few months. This is going to be embarrassing." "Just listen," Margaret said firmly. Zara sat down at the beautiful grand piano on stage. The concert hall, which had been filled with quiet chatter, became completely silent. Over 1,000 people were now focused on the small 12-year-old girl at the piano. For a moment, Zara felt overwhelmed by the size of the audience and the importance of the moment. Her hands were shaking slightly as she placed them on the keys. She could see Margaret and Elena in the front row, both giving her encouraging smiles. Then she remembered Elena's words, "It is just you and the music, having a conversation together." Zara took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and began to play. The opening notes of Chopin's Ballade flowed from the piano with such beauty and tenderness that the entire audience seemed to hold its breath. Zara's touch was perfect, gentle, and dreamy, just as Elena had taught her. Richard, who had been prepared to be embarrassed, found himself leaning forward in his seat. The music was beautiful, more beautiful than he had expected. But he told himself that anyone could play slowly and softly. Then Zara reached the more challenging sections of the piece. Her fingers flew across the keys with incredible speed and accuracy. The music became passionate and stormy, and Zara's whole body moved with the rhythm and emotion of the piece. The audience was mesmerized. This was not just technical skill. This was true artistry. Zara was not just playing the notes, she was telling a story with the music. Every phrase expressed deep emotion, and her playing had a maturity that seemed impossible for someone so young. Richard stared at the stage in complete shock. He had never heard Zara play a complete piece before, only bits and pieces when he happened to walk by the music room. He had no idea she was capable of this level of performance. As Zara moved into the final section of the piece, the music became triumphant and joyful. She played with such power and emotion that several people in the audience began to cry. The music seemed to tell the story of overcoming great obstacles and finding happiness despite difficulties. When Zara played the final gentle notes of the piece, the concert hall was completely silent for several seconds. Then the audience erupted into the loudest applause of the evening. People jumped to their feet, giving Zara a standing ovation that lasted for several minutes. Zara stood up from the piano bench and took a small bow, her face glowing with happiness and relief. She had done it. She had played the piece perfectly. And the audience loved it. Richard remained in his seat, stunned. He could not believe what he had just witnessed. The child he had dismissed as worthless, the girl he had called a charity case and burden, had just given one of the most beautiful musical performances he had ever heard. "How long has she been able to play like that?" Richard asked Margaret quietly. "She has been working on this piece for 3 months," Margaret replied. "But her natural talent was always there. You just never bothered to notice it." The competition continued with the remaining performers, but it was clear to everyone in the audience that Zara's performance had been something special. The other young pianists who performed after her were skilled and well-trained, but none of them had the natural musicality and emotional depth that Zara had displayed. Richard sat through the rest of the competition in a daze. He kept replaying Zara's performance in his mind, unable to believe that the same girl he had been cruel to for months was capable of such artistry. He thought Abbe. The morning after the competition, Zara woke up to find her trophy sitting on her bedside table, gleaming in the sunlight. For a moment, she wondered if the whole thing had been a dream. But the trophy was real, and so was the memory of the audience. Giving her a standing ovation, downstairs, Margaret was making a special celebration breakfast, humming happily as she cooked. When Zara came into the kitchen, Margaret swept her into a big hug. "Good morning, my champion," Margaret said, with tears of joy in her eyes. "How does it feel to be a national competition winner?" "It still does not feel real," Zara said, smiling. "I keep thinking I will wake up and find out it was all a dream." "Well, it is very real," Margaret said. "And I could not be more proud of you." Richard was sitting at the breakfast table, reading the morning newspaper. On the front page of the local section was a large photo of Zara at the piano, with the headline, "Local Girl Wins National Piano Competition." There was a smaller photo of their family at the competition, with Richard, Margaret, and Zara standing together. When Zara sat down at the table, Richard looked up from the newspaper. His expression was different from usual, not cold or angry, but uncertain and almost nervous. "Your picture is in the paper," Richard said quietly, turning the newspaper toward her. Zara looked at the photo and the article about her victory. She could hardly believe that she was important enough to be in the newspaper. "It says here that you are the youngest winner in the competition's history," Richard continued, "and that several music schools have already called offering you scholarships." "Really?" Zara asked, excited. "Really," Margaret confirmed. "Elena called this morning. She has already received calls from Juilliard, Curtis Institute, and the New England Conservatory. They all want to meet with you," Richard continued, reading from the newspaper. "It says that the head judge called your performance one of the most moving and technically excellent performances by a young pianist in recent memory." As Richard read the positive reviews and accolades, something strange was happening inside him. For months, he had convinced himself that Zara was worthless, that she did not belong in their family or their social circle. But now the whole city was praising her talent and achievement. Important people were calling her a prodigy and a future star. The phone started ringing early that morning and did not stop. Friends and acquaintances were calling to congratulate the family on Zara's victory. Richard's business associates were calling to express their amazement and to ask about Zara's future plans. "Richard, this is incredible," said James Morrison, one of Richard's most important business partners. "I had no idea your daughter was so talented. My wife and I were at the competition last night, and her performance was absolutely stunning." "Thank you," Richard said, unsure how to respond. He was not used to people praising Zara, especially his business colleagues. "You must be so proud," James continued. "Having a child with that level of talent is extraordinary. My wife says she has never been so moved by a musical performance." After Richard hung up the phone, he sat quietly for a moment. He realized that his business reputation, which he cared about so much, was now connected to Zara's success. People were congratulating him and calling him lucky to have such a talented daughter. But more than that, Richard was beginning to understand that Zara really was special. The newspaper reviews, the phone calls from prestigious music schools, the praise from respected musicians, all of it proved that Zara's talent was real and extraordinary. That afternoon, a reporter from the city's major newspaper came to interview the family. Richard found himself in the awkward position of having to talk about Zara, as if he had always supported her musical education. "Mr. Williams, you must have recognized Zara's talent early on," the reporter said. "When did you first realize she had such a gift for music?" Richard looked at Zara, who was sitting next to Margaret on the living room couch. She was looking at him with curious eyes, waiting to see what he would say. "Well," Richard said slowly, "Zara has always been special. We knew she was bright and talented from the moment she came to live with us. It was not exactly a lie, but it was not the truth either. Richard could see that Zara looked surprised by his words. "And you have supported her musical education from the beginning?" the reporter asked. "Of course," Richard said, though the words felt strange in his mouth. "We believe in investing in our daughter's talents." After the interview, when the reporter had left, Zara approached Richard carefully. She had never had a real conversation with him before, and she was nervous. "Mr. Richard," she said quietly, "thank you for saying those nice things to the reporter." Richard looked at her and felt a stab of guilt. "Zara, I owe you an apology." Zara looked surprised. "An apology? I have not been kind to you since." "You came to live with us," Richard said, his voice getting quieter. "I said things that were cruel and unfair. I did not support your music lessons, and I made you feel unwelcome in your own home." Zara did not know what to say. She had never expected to hear an apology from Richard. "I was wrong about you," Richard continued. "You are clearly very talented and special. Last night, when I heard you play, I realized that I had completely misjudged you." "It is okay," Zara said softly, though Richard's treatment of her had hurt her deeply. "No, it is not okay," Richard said firmly. "A 12-year-old girl should not have to prove herself worthy of basic kindness and respect. You deserve better from me, and I am sorry." Over the next few days, Richard's attitude toward Zara began to change dramatically. He started asking her about her music and showing interest in her practice sessions. When more reporters called for interviews, he spoke proudly about Zara's achievement, but the change was not just about Richard's public image. Something deeper was happening. Watching Zara's performance had forced Richard to confront his own prejudices and cruelty. He began to see Zara not as an unwanted burden, but as a remarkable young person who had overcome tremendous obstacles to achieve something extraordinary. Elena continued to come for piano lessons, and now Richard would sometimes listen from the doorway. He was amazed by the beautiful music that filled their house, music that he had taken for granted or even complained about in the past. "She really is exceptional, is not she?" Richard said to Elena one day after a lesson. "She is one of the most talented students I have ever taught," Elena replied. "But more than that, she is a good person with a kind heart. You are very lucky to have her in your family." Richard nodded, finally beginning to understand what Elena meant. The transformation was not instant or complete. There were still moments when Richard felt awkward around Zara, unsure how to make up for months of coldness and cruelty. And Zara was still cautious around him, not entirely sure if his change of heart was permanent, but slowly, carefully they began to build a relationship. Richard started joining Margaret and Zara for dinner more often, asking about Zara's day at school and her music practice. He even began helping her with her math homework, discovering that she was as intelligent academically as she was musically. One evening, about 2 weeks after the competition, Zara was practicing piano when Richard came into the music room. Instead of complaining about the noise or interrupting her practice, he sat down in a chair and listened. When Zara finished the piece she was working on, Richard clapped softly. "That was beautiful," he said. "What piece was that?" "It is by Debussy," Zara said, still a little surprised when Richard showed interest in her music. "Elena is teaching me some impressionist composers now." "It sounds very different from the Chopin piece you played at the competition," Richard observed. "Yes, Debussy's music is more like painting with sounds," Zara explained, using words Elena had taught her. "It is supposed to create moods and feelings, rather than tell stories." Richard nodded, genuinely interested. "I never really understood classical music before, but hearing you play, I am starting to appreciate how complex and beautiful it can be." They sat together for a moment in comfortable silence. Then Richard said something that surprised both of them. "Zara, I want you to know that I am proud to be your father." Zara looked at him with wide eyes. It was the first time Richard had ever called himself her father. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means a lot to me. I know I have not acted like a father to you before," Richard continued. "But I would like to try to be better if you will give me the chance." Zara thought for a moment about all the months of coldness and cruel words. But she also thought about Margaret's lessons about forgiveness and second chances. I would like that, she said softly. It was not a complete transformation overnight. Richard still had to work hard to overcome his prejudices and learn how to be a loving father to Zara, and Zara still had to learn to trust that. Richard's change was real and permanent, but it was a beginning. The music that had started as Zara's escape from Richard's cruelty had become the bridge that brought them together. Her talent had not only won her a national competition, but it had also won her something even more valuable: a father's love and respect. As Margaret watched Richard and Zara beginning to build their relationship, she felt grateful that she had trusted her instincts and brought Zara home. Love had triumphed over prejudice, talent had overcome cruelty, and their family was finally becoming whole.